As you can see, it's a lovely day. So for me, it's a great day to be announced as the new manager of Newcastle United Football Club. I'm very proud of that. I'm very honoured about that. And I'm absolutely thrilled.
It had been such a long time coming, but finally, Sir Bobby Robson was the Newcastle United manager. He was the man tasked with re-energising the club, St James's Park, the whole city really. He might have just made Newcastle United's best ever Premier League team along the way.
Oh, and a block by Tommy Wright Phillips again, and Sunderland has scored. It's 2-1.
I don't think it's too sensationalist to call this Ruud Gullit's managerial suicide note. Not so much the defeat against Sunderland, despite it being a long-anticipated match in an illustrious rivalry. No, it was the image of Duncan Ferguson and Alan Shearer on the bench watching the game simply unfold. It was Newcastle's fourth defeat from their first 5 league games to begin the 99-2000 season, a campaign where Sunderland mortifyingly finished in the top half above Newcastle. The start was only compounded with Ruud Gullit presiding over another limp visit to Wembley in a defeat to Manchester United in a cup final 3 months prior. He quickly resigned as Newcastle's season lurched from disaster to cataclysmic, rudderless in defeats at Old Trafford and Stamford Bridge after Gullit's hasty departure. Newcastle United had been in the doldrums since Kevin Keegan left in the first weeks of '97. Then they hired the perfect man to lift the spirits, Bobby Robson. Supposedly retired and almost certainly belatedly, Robson was in through the door 3 years after he kept to his word and contract when he remained with Barcelona despite the Spanish club treating him with utter contempt. His long-awaited homecoming wasn't too bad, you know. A great start, but it was more than on-pitch matters that Robson had to remedy. First things first, repairing more Gullit damage by bringing Rob Lee back in from the cold. He'd been shunted to the reserves, his number handed to new signing Kieran Dyer, as if there wasn't room for both at the club. Robson solidified the core of the team instantly, headed by captain Alan Shearer, his best mate Rob Lee, and the experienced lads of Shay Given, Warren Barton and Gary Speed. Whilst it wasn't an immediate lift-off, they did give a very good Leeds United a game at Elland Road, only going down 3-2. Alarm bells, though, must have been ringing after a 4-1 defeat at Highfield Road next. The entire club knew this process was not going to be easy. There was, however, a fight returning to the club, a lifting of standards as CSKA Sofia and FC Zurich were ejected from the UEFA Cup, and home victories against Middlesbrough and Derby County kept the club ticking over in the Premier League. And even though their avenues to silverware were slowly being eradicated, first at St Andrews in the 3rd round of the League Cup, and then at the same stage in Europe against Roma, the Magpies were stable once again. Robson even got them to Wembley for the 3rd consecutive season.
Shearer! He keeps his balance, and Ferguson, excellent goal! Shearer far post! Here comes Dar once more, and here comes Ferguson!
Alright, the cup run was extinguished by Chelsea at the semi-final stage, but by that point the season had become enough of a basis for a strong foundation. 11th in the league, somewhat present in the cup competitions, and a clear idea of where the club should be under the stewardship of someone that actually cared, Newcastle United were going to be alright. With a full summer under his belt to reshape the club, the transition was quick. Out went the fall guy for Shearer's substitute appearance in Gullit's last stand, Paul Robinson. No, not that one. Or that one. Yep, cheers. Then the man that stood alongside Shearer in that dugout to more sadness, Duncan Ferguson, was gone. In total, Robson cleared the decks of Timur Bayer, Laurent Chavert, Didier Domi and Alan Goma across the season. Meanwhile, Cal Court was an expensive gamble from Wimbledon, Lemanu Luar-Luatu from Colchester, whilst Olivier Bernard and Andy O'Brien's acquisitions would come to represent bargains in the long term. Less said about Clarence Acuna, Daniel Cardone and Christian Basadas, the better however. Whilst it's clear that Newcastle weren't completely remedied, and neither immediately, Robson was attempting to mop up a hurricane of quality player sales over the course of 5 years, back to the days of Les Ferdinand and David Ginola.
Given a set again, stand set again.
Go Route 1 at St James's Park,
a policy that brought an instant return.
St James' Park had been improved and renovated to the tune of 50 million quid and 52,000 seats in capacity, and whilst Cal Court scored on his home debut in August on the stadium's curtain raiser, it was obvious quite quickly that the forward was going to be as inconsistent as the Toon throughout the season. Unfortunately, it was a campaign with just as many afternoons like the 5-0 whitewashing at Highbury and embarrassments at home to Sunderland and Manchester City as there were thrilling wins against Leeds United, Aston Villa and Spurs. 14 wins but 15 defeats. Newcastle had to settle for mid-table mediocrity again, but were under no illusion that a drastic improvement needed to happen next. One mark in the positive column, Alan Shearer would be back after an injury-hit campaign. No longer would they have to rely on players not ready in Lualua and Shola Amiobi. Another was more targeted recruitment that brought Craig Bellamy to play alongside him. Bellamy, who Robson had courted a year prior before they settled on courting Cal Court. He proved cheap thanks to Coventry City's relegation at £6.5 million, whilst a further 14 million quid would be shelled out on Laurent Robert and, in the winter, Jermaine Genus. Now they'd warmed up in the transfer market, the collaboration of chief scout Charlie Woods and the manager could no longer miss, and they had to warm up quite quickly to competitive football thanks to the Intertoto Cup.
That's good work from the Argentine player. Got a bad ball into the middle. Beating is right. Here's Solano. And Forster's Rotten with a cross in towards Boutal. Fantastic goal.
The good old Intertoto, fine when you can undeservingly backdoor your way into the UEFA Cup by winning it, a glorified mess of a pre-season friendly tour when you don't. It made for a campaign of zero distractions. Bobby Robson would be knighted during the season, but he was no longer being tapped up for a return for England. With the team's increasingly clean bill of health, they began the season rapidly.
But inside the last 10 minutes, Shearer struck. Watching outside of him, doesn't want it, doesn't need it. Right in the thick of it, but not this time. And here's Noel Solano for Newcastle, and he's made it 4-3.
They'd beaten some of the biggest clubs England and Europe in fact had to offer. Who gives a shite if they were out of the League Cup? The Toon were top of the tree on Christmas Day, and they had proven that they could actually win in the capital as well. Bellamy and Shearer might not have got along off the pitch, but they were magic on it, and the starting 11 was improved at the turn of the year with the return to fitness for Kieran Dyer. The Christmas period is hectic enough as it is, so a simple enough 3-0 thrashing over local rivals Middlesbrough was brief respite on Boxing Day to line already turkey-filled stomachs. The Toon were in form. They'd not lost for an age in the league, but the best league on the planet kept feeding Newcastle dangerous opponents as 2001 became 0-2.
Hasselbank's in the middle, he doesn't need him. Silvestre, back left or right.
If ever there was a week to strike whilst the iron was hot, this was it. Newcastle, though, had gone from top of the table by 3 points at the halfway mark of the season to fourth by the time they played again in the league. After a brief FA Cup pit stop, the fixture computer spat out another easy league fixture when leaders Leeds United pitched up on Tyneside.
Oh, little flick from Solano, it's in! In towards Bellamy, on goes Dyer! 3-1!
See that? Have a bang on that. It's called impetus. Forget Filbert Street and a pale imitation of a football match 7 days later. There was progression in the cup to the quarter-final stage. There was a machine-like quality to Newcastle's results in the league. They went to London at the end of January and picked off Spurs. They showed grit to come from behind against Bolton. They slapped Southampton. Next up was Sunderland, and come the end of the week, they could even lead the league once again.
Third time, so lucky! Turn it up! Boy, is he happy!
Nikos Dabizas, an underappreciated club stalwart with the winner that kept Toon fate in their own hands. Whilst December 2001 is an often noted nirvana for Newcastle in retrospect, February 02 is equally important in keeping the Magpies in the hunt. That month was important for the club moving forward, as Warren Barton and Rob Lee were both packaged up and sent to Derby, with Jermaine Genus being welcomed to the club from Nottingham Forest. In one stroke, the experience and the average age of the squad had shrunk quite dramatically. 3 transfers that all made sense on their own in a vacuum, but in the presence of a potential double charge, maybe not the shrewdest timing. Neither was a Craig Bellamy knee injury that ruled him out for the majority of the season.
What a great touch from Bergkamp! And here comes Murphy! Bergkamp takes it towards Adam.
Gone was the chance of the FA Cup with defeat at Highbury, slipping away the chance of the Premier League after both Arsenal and Liverpool turned them over, and even relegation-threatened Ipswich Town stole a point at St James's Park. United were back in 4th place, 8 points off the pace of Manchester United, but with 2 games in hand. More alarmingly, however, was the impeccable form of Arsenal, who sat 7 points clear of the Magpies and had played the same amount of games. Newcastle therefore had to be perfect to keep pace. 6 goals against Everton to end a horrific March was that kind of required form. Less so, the pair of 1-1 draws to open up April against Aston Villa and Fulham. By this point, Newcastle were thanking their lucky stars that the Champions League had opened up to such an extent that their current position of 4th was now going to be enough to qualify. With 5 fixtures remaining against mid-table fodder, Newcastle had the best running to eat at Europe's top table once again.
Forced wide, but it's still a chance. Oh, Lualua! 2-0 down, 3-2 up. By Solano. Speed! Step back across.
The point at Ewood Park did it with breathing room to spare. 4th place and Champions League football at the start of the season, you'd have no hands left for the amount of snapping off Toon supporters would have done to you. But there was a slight twinge of disappointment in the March meltdown which saw hopes and dreams frittered away of bigger glories. That was rapidly forgotten about when the Champions League anthem got playing in the heads, when names like Rivaldo were being linked to the club, and it was hard not to get all starry-eyed about the 2002-03 season ahead. In actuality, the summer was less Rivaldo and more Sylvan Distan toning them down to go to a dirt-poor Manchester City, with names like Titus Bramble and Hugo Viana coming through the door. They were both signings that fit the Robson mould of young talent, but there was a dearth of talent for what was an added girth to the schedule. And it all began with an unpronounceable team from Bosnia-Herzegovina that I'm going to butcher now, Željezničar.
To beat the keeper. A great finish. Newcastle were on their way home with a priceless away goal.
In the middle, he's made a terrific run. And he doesn't like to give up the ball lightly. And a good run as well. Here comes Viana. Surely he doesn't want to miss out.
Champions League group stages, here we come, the jubilant Newcastle fans would have cheered, forgetting that back home they'd lost 3 games already in the Premier League by the time the actual group stages came along. That's a third of their entire loss tally from the prior season. And the Champions League was even more brutal.
Newcastle also lost a key player inside 5 minutes. Played 2, lost 2. Stadio della HELPI in Turin. 2 goals by Alessandro Del Piero.
All that work, all that effort to piss away the club's first 3 games in the Champions League since '97. But hey, at least they were back to winning ways in the Premier League. A loss in Kiev, no matter. Sunderland will roll over at St James's Park. Defeats against Feyenoord and Juventus, don't worry. There's newly promoted teams with names like Birmingham City and West Bromwich Albion who will lose to you quite gladly. And then Blackburn stuck 5 past Newcastle. Great prep work for what was the biggest game in club history in years, when Juventus came to town.
Still with Andy Griffin. It's got in. Andy Griffin has scored. It's 1-0 Newcastle. Arno's corner. Oh yes! And Shearer. It is on.
Sorry, I got a bit excited with the edit then and showed you the crucial win over Dynamo as well, a match that probably gets lost in the shuffle between the Juve win and the next match day in Rotterdam. Arguably, the club's most important in competition history.
Bellamy, chance for Craig Bellamy! Tunis for Newcastle, it comes out to Viana. Well strapped for Bombarda! And Learning! It's a good jump. It's Kieran Dyer. Pass back 100! Oh, Dyer blocks Bellamy! It's in!
But this was the problem with Newcastle in Europe in this time. Win back home, cool, you're going to have to sacrifice some European results. Get back into form on the continent, out of the League Cup and back to losing ways in the Premier League with you. Then with a second group stage, yes, second group stage upon the Toon, they shipped 5 in controversial fashion at Old Trafford. Who's that in the distance there, hairing up the A1? Oh, don't mind them, it's only Inter fucking Milan.
Champions League. For those who took this, Almeida fired them into a 2-goal lead. Crespo on the end of Okan's a 4-1 defeat.
What's that stadium in the distance there? Only the sodding Camp Nou.
And Danny! Kluivert! You're pushing and shoving going on. Now was that over the line? It is. The flag's up far side.
And so Newcastle United were back in the same position as they were a few weeks prior, pointless after a couple of group games in what was feeling like an utter maze of a Champions League format. At least the competition was put to bed for 2 full calendar months. Just ignore the prospect of the most recent runners-up in Bayer Leverkusen in a quick-fire double-header when it did return. But that was tomorrow's problem. In the now, Newcastle were 9th, 13 points off the Arsenal pace. The perfect time then to move through the gears.
Ball loose for Gary Speed. He's hit it and he scored. In the area. Robert's cross. Bellamy. It's arriving through Jenner. It's ahead of him. Sylvie Craig Bellamy. Casey Keller pushes it out and chance.
February was here, the champions was back around the corner and the Magpies were fluttering back into the title race, second and only 5 back on Arsenal now. And you knew Newcastle meant business because they opened up the chequebook and instead of a fatigued moth limping out, wings clipped, a £9 million wedge was busy capitalising on Leeds United's financial anguish to pull Jonathan Woodgate up to St James's Park. And then Bayer Leverkusen turned up and weren't what they were advertised as being.
Still going, Amiobi through the middle, in, and here's a great shot. Perfect delivery from Gary Speed. Legion and Shearer's waiting there. The chance, and perhaps.
Now hold on. 2 Champions League wins and 2 Premier League wins in the same 2-week period. And you're saying they're against good opposition, are you? In the hunt for a first ever Champions League knockout match and a first league title in nearly a century. Surely, it was all just too good to be true, wasn't it?
Good ball in and Jeremy
Slipped away. Titus Bramble was hassled by Patrick Kluivert.
and here's Scholes and that's his hat-trick.
And yep, with that Paul Scholes hat-trick, the season was over. You can blame Middlesbrough's hasty postponement from February to slap bang in the middle of Newcastle's Champions League charge maybe if you want. But things had improved to such an extent that Newcastle were 5 games out from the end of the season and had Champions League qualification sewn up, and it was a disappointment. Now 1 point from games against Fulham and Aston Villa certainly tested that confidence as Liverpool crept to within a point of the Magpies. Thankfully, Newcastle saw the fixture list and saw who was next. They needn't have even worried.
Time Derby and Norberto. Diana with a free kick.
They'd got through the campaign unscathed with lumps of experience heaped onto a young squad, so the theory went. The 2003-04 season would be the best yet.
Newcastle. Shearer looking to lead from the front and lifted it miles over the bar. And again, Jerkovic. And he's buried it, and it's Partizan Belgrade who go through.
Top level sport though isn't as easy as all that. Out of the Champions League before the actual Champions League, without a win in the Premier League until October the 4th and early exits from the domestic cups, spoke to a rancid first half of the season. It was yet another misstep in the transfer market that saw zero cash spent in the summer of 2003, a summer that should have been the one time where the club pushed the boat out. It was only the capitalising on Leeds United's dire situation again that brought Newcastle a new player, Lee Bowyer. For once a player of enough experience but not too old to be thinking about their UEFA Pro licence or Sky Sports punditry. But just as one name entered, one exited, Nobby Solano midway through the campaign. Again, Newcastle didn't have enough. There was a smidgen of fight left though, and it was shown in the UEFA Cup.
This is a big chance. There, steaming through there. This is Laurent Robert. Up for Shearer to blast one.
And it's going to be 3. Alan Shearer.
Oh, good header. Could have been a goal at the other end. It might be one here for Didier Drogba.
And once Newcastle fans broke away from their European hangover, they found a situation back home that wasn't completely unsalvageable. Okay, they were in 6th position, they had a poor return of 53 points, but to paraphrase Kevin Keegan, they were still fighting for that Champions League qualification. A game in hand on Liverpool with a final day trip to Anfield. Why couldn't Newcastle go again?
Actions all over the place, and the shot comes in.
Over the home side.
It felt like a natural end. Newcastle United had squelched to UEFA Cup spot. When Sir Bobby Robson found them in 1999, that would have been an immaculate achievement. Now pushing 72 years of age with friction between he and chairman Freddie Shepherd, it was only going to go one way, emphasised further by a failure to sign Wayne Rooney in the summer. Robson should have been offered a dignified way out, either in the summer of 2004 or at the end of his contract the following summer. Instead, he was dumped out like hot garbage after 4 games of the 2004-05 season. It would take 20 years for the club to repair this latest mess. It was a case of so close but yet so far away for Newcastle United in the Premier League era. It was undoubtedly a much stronger division than it was in the days of Kevin Keegan loving it if they beat Manchester United to the title in '96. Feasibly in Newcastle's pomp there were 6 credible title challenges, from the experience of Man United and Arsenal who had actually done it, to the historical units of Liverpool and Chelsea and the young pretenders in Leeds United. Given the squad's makeup, Newcastle could easily be placed into the latter of that category, especially when 2 of their number, Craig Bellamy and Jermaine Jenas, won the PFA Young Player of the Year award in Sir Bobby's time at the club. For all the experience around the squad, namely Shearer, Speed and Given, there was probably too much of a gulf to the young and hungry talent of Dyer, Bellamy and Jenas. Attempts were made to bring in those like Jonathan Woodgate and Nicky Butt, but it was far too late by that point. It should be an era less remembered for the partisan penalties, the Loire lurking at Fratton Park, and the missed opportunities, and one remembered for Shearer's belter against Everton, topping the league at Christmas, nights in Rotterdam, Milan, Barcelona. They weren't cup finals like they had been under Joe Harvey or Gordon Lee, they weren't the title races like they had been under Kevin Keegan, but Sir Bobby Robson's vintage of Newcastle United at the turn of the millennium could comfortably give any one of those Newcastle teams a game on their day. And to learn about those other United teams, click on this playlist, our Newcastle United series.